proceed 10 seconds from now.
Hello, should I start? Hello, are we ready to start? Hello from the National Archives. My name is Missy McNatt, and I'm an education specialist in Washington, D.C. And welcome to the National Archives Comes Alive Young Learners Program. We will offer the Young Learners Program once a month through the spring. And to find the dates and times of future programs, you can go on the National Archives, archives.gov website and check events, or check the National Archives Facebook page. This morning, we will meet President Abraham Lincoln, portrayed by Bob Gleason of the American Historical Theater. President Lincoln will explain to us how Thanksgiving became a national holiday that all Americans celebrate on the same day. And there's a great historical coincidence, and I love historical coincidences, and that is that in 1863, for the first National Thanksgiving, it was held on Thursday, November 26th, and in this year, in 2020, our Thanksgiving is on Thursday, November 26th. If you'd like to learn more about the 1863 Thanksgiving Proclamation and related documents, you can go to docsteach.org. And at the end of the program, we will share the link for the featured activity connected to this program. So at the end of President Lincoln's presentation, there will be a question and answer session, and you are welcome to type in your questions into the YouTube chat during the presentation. And we have a National Archives staff member who is monitoring that. And please let us know where you're watching from as well. So this program is brought to you by the National Archives Education Team, the National Archives, and the National Archives Foundation. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you perhaps the most beloved and famous of American presidents, President Abraham Lincoln.
Well, there you are. Welcome. As you may know, I set aside several hours every week to visit with people. Anyone from anywhere who wants to drop by. I like to know what people are thinking, or feeling, and if there's anything I can do to help, or any problems I can solve. Sometimes people want to complain about something I said or did. Sometimes they want to thank me for doing my job. I call these sessions my public opinion beds. And, anybody can come by, you know. It's important for me to know what real people think, not just Congress or the newspapers. I am the president of the people, by the people, and for the people. And the people are always welcome here. They get to know me, and I get to know them. One of the things they know about me is that I like to tell stories. Sometimes it's easier to explain a complicated thing by telling a simple story. And that's what I'm going to do now. You probably know me because of the Gettysburg Address or the Emancipation Proclamation. Everybody's heard of the Emancipation Proclamation, which announced our intention to do away with slavery in this country. But there's another proclamation you might not know about. It's Proclamation number 106, and it was issued on the 3rd of October of 1863. And it announced that Thanksgiving Day will be celebrated in this country as a national holiday. I signed that proclamation, and I had the Great Seal of the United States stamped on it. But to be honest, I cannot take all the credit. I did not invent Thanksgiving, although I am an inventor. Most people don't know that I am the only president who holds a patent for an invention. I invented this. Now, I bet you can't guess what it is, so I'll tell you. This is my device, my system for refloating boats that have got stuck on sandbars in the river. In my younger days, I worked on a cargo boat on the Mississippi River, and if you got stuck on a sandbar, you were going to be there for days until it rained enough to raise the water level and float your boat. So these poles, you see, they were used to pump up airbags on the side of the boat to raise it up and then let it float free. But nobody ever built one, so I never found out whether it would work or not. But you can still see the model over at the patent office if you're curious. Now, you may ask yourself, what does this story have to do with Thanksgiving? Well, absolutely nothing. But I wanted to make it clear that I don't go around taking credit for other people's ideas. And the idea for Thanksgiving is very old. It goes back centuries in different countries, celebrating things like military victories, the birth of the royal baby, or the end of an epidemic. It's been celebrated in different places at different times for different reasons. The early Spanish settlers in Fort Augustine, Florida, well, they celebrated a Thanksgiving in 1565. There are reports of Thanksgiving celebration in Virginia in 1619. And of course, the famous Pilgrim Thanksgiving was celebrated up in Massachusetts in 1621. Now, harvest festivals have been celebrated all over the world ever since people started growing their own food. I grew up on a small farm in Indiana, and everything we ate, we either grew ourselves or we found growing in the woods. We fished for fish in the streams. The men hunted wild game in the forests. The folks kept pigs for ham and bacon and sausage, or a cow for milk, cheese, and butter. There were also chickens for eggs, and if one of the chickens stopped laying eggs, there'd be fried chicken and chicken soup. When the harvest was bountiful in the fall, the folks would get together and have a little harvest festival. There'd be plenty to eat, and somebody always brought along a fiddle so that the young folks could sing and dance. But as time went by, some people wished there was a particular day, the same day every year, to celebrate Thanksgiving for all the things that life has given us. Now, one of the people who had that idea was a young lady named Sarah Josepha Hale. Sarah Josepha Hale. Ever heard of her? Well, you should, and for good reason. And one of those reasons is, you may find this surprising. Everybody knows my Gettysburg Address, and they know that it starts out 77 years ago, but most people can't recite much further than that. Sarah Josepha Hale wrote something that everybody knows, including yourselves, and it goes, "Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. It followed her to school one day, which was against the rule. It made the children laugh and play to see a lamb at school." Now, Sarah wrote that when she was a young school teacher. One of her students, a girl named Mary, came to school one day, followed by her pet lamb. And Sarah wrote a poem about it. Now, Sarah Josepha Hale was born in New Hampshire in 1788, just about a year before President George Washington declared a day of Thanksgiving to celebrate our new nation. Her father had fought in the Continental Army with George Washington, and both her parents believed in equal education for boys and girls. And though Sarah was mostly educated at home, she became a school teacher. She married a young man, a lawyer, named David Hale, and together they had 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls, before David died, when Sarah was only 34. While raising her children, she became an author. She published a book of poetry and a novel called Northwood, which was one of the first books to explain slavery in this country. Now, that book was an immediate success, and Sarah was invited to move to Boston to edit the ladies' magazine. And so she did for 8 years. In her spare time, she started a foundation to provide help for the families of sailors who had been lost at sea. Having lost her own husband, she sympathized with young widows with children to raise. She also raised money to build the Bunker Hill Monument and to help repair George Washington's Mount Vernon, which was in sad shape by then, and she helped found Vassar College. But one day, a magazine publisher in Philadelphia was so eager to have her work for him that he bought the ladies' magazine, lock, stock, and barrel, just so she could be his editor. And so she was. For the next 40 years, she made Godey's Ladies Book the most popular, successful, and influential magazine in the country. Now, in 1846, she began her campaign for a national Thanksgiving Day. She wrote the president, President Taylor, President Fillmore, President Pierce, President Buchanan, and got no results. Then she wrote to me. To Abraham Lincoln, Sir, permit me as editress of the Ladies' Book to request a few minutes of your precious time while laying before you a subject of deep interest to myself and, as I trust, even to the President of our Republic. This subject is to have the day of our annual Thanksgiving made a national and fixed Union festival. Well, in 1863, we were engaged in a great civil war. Very, very large battles were being fought to put an end to slavery and make sure that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Anyone would think that I was too busy trying to keep the country going to concern myself with a new idea for a national holiday. But having just achieved great victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, it began to look as if the tide was turning, and maybe the end of the war wasn't so far away. And I thought maybe people needed a special day to remember all the good things we were fighting for and how to appreciate the idea of what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. That's a good line. I'm probably going to use that. Well, at the time, I was too busy writing my Gettysburg address, so I asked my Secretary of State, William Seward, to write the proclamation for me to sign. Now, Secretary Seward is a fine man and a great writer, and he produced a very moving and uplifted document that I was proud to sign my name to. That was October the 3rd, 1863. And on November the 26th, just 7 days after I delivered the Gettysburg Address, the first National Thanksgiving Day was celebrated. Now, how you celebrate Thanksgiving probably depends on the customs where you live. Now, Sarah Josepha Hale, in her book, talks about a Thanksgiving memory of a celebration in her house when she was a child. It featured roast turkey, bread dressing, winter squash, boiled potatoes and onions, buttermilk biscuits with fresh churned butter, cranberry relish, ginger cake with whipped cream, coffee, tea, and raspberry shrub, which is a kind of fruit punch. Now, my wife, she grew up on a very, very fancy mansion in Kentucky, and liked to tell me of the big parties they would have with every kind of treat you can imagine. Then I would tell her about the time my family sat down to give thanks for a humble meal of boiled potatoes. Rich or poor, feast or famine, people celebrated. Some folks stayed in church most of the day. Some folks had a quiet celebration at home. Some folks traveled to meet relatives. Over the river and through the wood to grandfather's house we go. The horse knows the way to carry the sleigh through the white and drifted snow. Over the river and through the wood to grandfather's house away. We would not stop for doll or top, for 'tis Thanksgiving Day. Over the river and through the wood, oh, how the wind does blow. It stings the toes and bites the nose as over the ground we go. Over the river and through the wood and straight through the barnyard gate. We seem to go extremely slow. It is so hard to wait. Over the river and through the wood. When grandmother sees us come, she will say, "Oh dear, the children are here. Bring a pie for everyone." Over the river and through the wood, now grandmother's cap I spy. Hurrah for the fun! Is the pudding done? Hurrah for the pumpkin pie! Now, that poem was written by another great woman, Lydia Maria Child. And like Sarah Josepha Hale, she was an author, a teacher, a poet, a crusader against slavery, and she published a magazine for young folks for 8 years until public opposition to her stand on slavery caused circulation to drop, and she was forced to cancel the magazine. She continued to write poems and novels and wrote a very useful book called The Frugal Housewife, which offered recipes and advice on how to run a household on a limited budget. My wife Mary made good use of that book when she left her wealthy Kentucky home to come and marry me, a poor young lawyer just starting out in Springfield. She used that book to cook up some very satisfying and simple meals. Now, of course, we live in the president's house. We have a great big kitchen and a whole staff to come up with all sorts of sumptuous meals for great state occasions, and important dignitaries visiting from all over the world. Mary feels right at home at those fancy parties, but I sometimes miss those old-fashioned hoedowns we used to have in Indiana when I was a boy and didn't have a care in the world. Well, Thanksgiving is coming around again, and I know we've all been through some tough times, but no matter how things may seem, there's always a great deal to be thankful for. As another author, Cecile Frances Alexander, wrote, "All things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful. Let us be thankful for them all." Now, at this point, we'll take questions. If you're too shy to ask the first question, we can take the second question first.
Okay, so let me come back with, first of all, thank everybody for joining us, and we have people from across the country and literally across the world. We have somebody from Kyrgyzstan, which is so exciting, and I think it's fantastic that you're so inspirational, President Lincoln, and getting us inspired and thinking about Thanksgiving and all we have to be thankful for. So, first question we have is, what was it like signing the Emancipation Proclamation?
Well, it was, I think, as far as I'm concerned, the high watermark of my career. When I was a boy and growing up, I was worried that I'd go through life and die and nobody would ever know that I was there. But I felt that if anything would secure my reputation in history, it would be the signing of that Emancipation Proclamation. So it was a great honor to be able to do that.
And another question is, today it's a tradition for the president to pardon a turkey. Did you do such a thing in your day?
Well, I have to be honest and say that I never pardoned the Thanksgiving turkey. What I pardoned was the Christmas turkey. A farmer had sent us a great big majestic turkey, and my boy Tad fell in love with it, and it became his best friend. He named it Jack, and it would follow him everywhere he went. So when it come time for Christmas, he begged me, knowing that I often pardoned soldiers who had fallen asleep on guard duty or had gotten scared in battle and run away. And I felt it wouldn't do those fellas any good to hang them, so I would pardon them. It always gave me great satisfaction. So Tad come to me one day and asked if I would pardon Jack the turkey. And so I did. So on Christmas we had roast beef instead of turkey.
I wonder if that's where the tradition of pardoning turkeys came from.
Well, it's certainly good for publicity.
Yeah, that's great. Another question: what is your favorite food, and whether Thanksgiving or whenever?
Well, my wife thinks I'm kind of a picky eater. I get up pretty early in the White House and usually have breakfast with coffee and a boiled egg. At lunch, if I have the time, I have an apple and a glass of milk. And if you ask me 2 hours after dinner what I had for dinner, sometimes I forget what I had. But I will say that I like gingerbread. I think I like gingerbread more and get less of it than any feller I know.
Well, I have to tell you, when you were describing the meal with gingerbread and the whipped cream, my mouth was watering. I like gingerbread too. And we have another question. Where's your hat?
Oh, yes, folks are very interested in my hat. This is it. Now, as Mr. Shakespeare says, clothes or apparel oft proclaim the man. In my day, you could almost tell what someone did for a living by the type of hat they wore. The king had a crown, the soldier had his three-cornered hat in George Washington's day, and most respectable gentlemen had what they call a tall hat or a plug hat sometimes. They started out pretty short and got taller and taller as time went by, as fellas tried to outdo each other in stature. I used mine to keep notes in that I don't want to forget. I used to deliver the mail out of it when I was a young postmaster. And if nothing else, you can always fill it full of water and give your horse a drink. And if you're kind to your horse, he'll get you home no matter what condition you're in.
Okay, well, we have a question about another very, very famous document that you mentioned, the Gettysburg Address. And did you really write it on a napkin? And also, did you think it was really going to be forgotten?
Well, I was sort of an afterthought for that ceremony in Gettysburg. It occurred to one of the organizers one day that they ought to have somebody official say, as they said, a few appropriate remarks after the big speech that lasted for 90 minutes. So they gave me about 6 weeks' notice, and I wrote the first draft on White House stationery and kept poking at it and working on it and scratching at it, even to the night before I delivered the speech. I even interpolated a line as I delivered the speech, so the official copy has one line missing, and the copies I made afterwards have that line inserted. That line was, under God, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. So that was the last change I made right in the middle of things. But it was so short, only 2 minutes or so. The poor photographer could barely get his camera set up and only got a picture of the top of my head when I was sitting down. And people were expecting much longer and didn't know what to do. It was hardly a smattering of applause. I turned to my friend Ward Lamon and said, "Lamon, that speech won't scour." It's a term from farming where the dirt is so caked onto the plow that it doesn't come off easily and it doesn't make for good plowing. But the next day I got a little note from Mr. Edward Everett Horton, who made the big speech, and he said that he would flatter himself if he thought he got closer to the spirit of the day in 2 hours as I managed to do in 2 minutes. And that's one of the greatest compliments I ever got.
And it certainly has been well remembered. And then we have another question. Why are you on the least, of course, you probably didn't know that was going to happen, but you ended up on the least valuable coin on the penny. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I was never one to flatter myself or seek the accolades of the crowds. When we decided in the midst of the war that the country needed stable currency, I had my Treasury Secretary, Salmon P. Chase, get up with his people and produce what we call the greenback dollar. And since he wanted to run for president, he put his own picture on it. So it was quite a while before I got my picture on any of the currency. And so I am on the penny and the $5 bill. And people forget that I'm also on those nice new gold-looking coins that they're giving out these days. So that's enough for me. I'm not proud by any means. I never thought that there was anything special about my face. fella called me two-faced once, and I told him, if I had another face, do you think I'd wear this one?
That's great. And we have another question. How big was your childhood home, and what did you do as a little boy?
Well, my father was a carpenter, and he built our cabin, and it was just one big open room in those days out in the woods, fireplace on one end and a table and a few chairs that he made himself in the other. My bed was in a loft above the kitchen, and I had a ladder built into the wall for me to climb up there. We didn't spend much time indoors in the summertime because there was so much work to do on the farm. And in the winter, we sort of huddled by the fire all day. That is, when I wasn't out chopping more wood to keep the fire going, it had to go all the time, day and night, to warm the cabin and cook the food. So, no, compared to Mary Todd's mansion in Kentucky, it was a very humble little cabin indeed.
And anything special that you remember, any games that you played as a little boy that you remember?
My sister Sarah and I would play games that we had to make up ourselves. We'd play tag and jumping games and running games. If we found some scraps of cloth, we could sew them up into a ball and throw that back and forth with each other. As we got older and could travel to neighboring farms and play with the other children, or at school between sessions, then we would have racing games and wrestling games and a lot of things that young folks today wouldn't recognize and probably never heard of. But we were, through desperation, made our own games and had our own fun when we had time to do it when we weren't working on the farm.
Another question, what was school like?
It was the highlight of my time to be able to go to school when there was a school and when there was somebody to teach it. It was, again, a little building, just one room with a little fireplace in one corner. If you were sitting near the fireplace, you roasted. If you were sitting on the other side of the room, you froze. All the children from first grade to the 8th grade or so were all in there at the same time, all reciting their lessons at once. There was no notebooks or papers or chalkboard. You'd learn a lesson and you'd recite it. Some group would be doing the alphabet, some group would be reciting a poem, some group would be talking history, and they'd all be talking at once. It was called a blab school. And if you were coming up through the woods and the window was open, all you'd hear from the school was blah, 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 all at the same time. But I loved school. I'd rather be there than anywhere else. And I really regret the lack of opportunity. I would love to have a nice college education and a university in the East, and probably no one ever would have heard of me.
So we have time for one last question, and that is, what is your favorite song?
Well, I'm not as tune deaf as General Grant is, who says he only knows 2 songs. One is Yankee Doodle and the other isn't. I always loved music. We have very fine concerts in the White House by world-renowned musicians. But one of my favorite songs is just a funny little song that folks used to play on the banjo back home. It's called Picayune Butler. You've probably never heard of it, and you don't want to hear me sing it. The dogs howl when I try singing. But I love music. I think it's important for people, for their body and soul, to have music in their hearts, and I'm in favor of it.
Well, thank you so much, President Lincoln. We have learned so much this morning, and I've enjoyed hearing you talk about all your days at the White House as well as when you were growing up. So it's been great having you, and thank you everyone who joined us today. And this will be up on YouTube. Please feel free to share it. We do have a couple more slides for you to see. One is has the information with the link for the Docs Teach featured activity that's connected with this, and you can learn more about the 1863 Thanksgiving Proclamation. And there it is. And then we have the slide for our program in December, where we're going to meet Orville Wright, and it was in December of 1903 that the Wright brothers flew their first plane. So again, thank you to all, and I wish everyone the happiest of Thanksgiving, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and you've inspired me to make gingerbread. So wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.